Hi, Enfys, and welcome to Queer Magic. So I know you as author of the Major Arquina blog and uh, expert on Kabbalah and all manner of other exciting things. So, we're here to talk about queer magic. So is there anything else you want to add to that mini bio that I just did?
Thank you. It's lovely to be here, and thank you so much for taking the time to chat. Adding to that, I am my tradition's first openly non-binary acting high priest within the Assembly of the Sacred Wheel is about the only other point I'd add to that bio that's relevant to my magical work.
Yes, and that is great news because nice bit of activism there. That was good. So yeah, if you want to tell us a bit about your queer identity to kick off.
Ooh, nothing like starting with the small questions.
Yeah,
your
hi,
identity.
how are you?
Hi, tell us all about yeah, let's see. So I guess I'll start sort of early on and try to keep it fairly concise, but when I was 17, I realized I was bisexual, and it was sort of hilarious because this was in the 90s where the only bisexual I had heard of was the character on My So-Called Life on MTV, and that was it. Like, I didn't know anyone who was bi. It was brand new concept to me, and I had this whole crisis about I like girls, but I also like guys. And I just like, does this mean I'm a lesbian? Does it mean I'm straight? I don't know. And then one day it was like, oh, wait, I can be both. And that was such a weight off of my heart. And it's part of what motivates me to be fairly visible in my queerness today is like when you don't have models, it's hard to figure out what your own stuff is. And someday when you see someone like, oh, I'm like that person. Okay, that makes sense to me now. I'm hoping I can make other people's journeys a little bit less fraught. But yeah, I realized just a couple of years ago that I'm non-binary as well. And I like to describe myself simply as queer because there's, you know, non-binary, of course, has a lot of different sort of facets, and I'm still not quite found the exact right label for what works for my identity. So just I'm queer in gender, I'm queer in sexuality, I'm just queer. We'll just go with that.
Yeah, that's very similar to my experience, except I had David Bowie and to some extent Freddie Mercury as my bisexual people. Was like, oh right, there they are over there. And non-binary, I think I've always known that I'm gender fluid, and I struggled for a while with like, am I gender fluid or non-binary or genderqueer? I don't know, because, and also the word hasn't achieved public currency until relatively recently, but so it was a relief to have a word, actually. Yeah, it's pretty cool. So yeah, so tell us about your pagan journey.
Oh gosh. So I had experiences as young as the youngest I can remember is being 6 and having prophetic dreams that came true. And it was somewhat terrifying, but also didn't seem that abnormal to me at the time. But I also knew I couldn't talk to people about it, that they would think I was weird or strange or not right in the head. And so that was a thing that was with me. And I always knew when the phone was for me. Before we had caller ID or before cell phones, it was just the phone would ring on the wall and I'd be like, that's for me. And my parents like, how do you know that? I'm like, I don't know. They're like, are you expecting a call? No, I just know it's for me. So that was kind of the early part. I was also really fortunate that my dad started exploring, let's just say, non-mainstream spiritual practices out of curiosity when I was about 10, 11, 12, somewhere in there. And he talked to me a lot about the things he was learning about. And the more I heard, the more I was like, yeah, that makes sense to me. That fits more with how I feel and how I see the world. and started exploring specifically Wicca in college a little bit, which is a pretty standard story. Like, you know, oh, I'm bisexual and exploring Wicca in college. Like, I was a total trope, and I have no apologies for that. But it wasn't really until I found some community in my late 20s, early 30s, and I'm 41 now, so it's been a little over a decade, that I started to really dig deep into that aspect of my spiritual life. I think I kind of put it into a box for a while. Like, I can ignore this, I can ignore all these taps on my shoulder and all the, you know, things that I can't explain. And then I kind of hit a point of, no, I need a box to put them in. I need a box to put the things in that has a label and that I pay attention to and that I do on a regular basis. And after a couple of false steps, like many people have early in their journey, in trying to find a wholesome and positive and helpful teacher and community, I was very fortunate to find the Assembly of the Sacred Wheel in 2012, which is a syncretic Wiccan tradition based in the Mid-Atlantic that's been around for, oh, let's see, about 36 years now at this point. So it's lasted much longer than the average half-life of your typical tradition, but they just do incredible work, and I really love being a part of it. There's 14 covens in the tradition now, and I'm the acting high priest of one based in the Washington, D.C. suburbs.
That's so awesome that they're really supportive of your of queer identity. And so how does that, I mean, obviously there's stuff you can't tell me because both bound, right? But so how does that play out in ritual? So like,
I actually can talk about it. Yeah, the assembly there's very little that we keep as like tradition secret or anything. There are certain techniques that we may not teach publicly just because they're quite dangerous if you don't have a certain foundation of understanding, but it's very little that falls into that category. We even invite people to our initiations from outside the tradition. So yeah, so you can come to an initiation ceremony, even if you're not a member, if you are invited by the person being initiated. So
that's cool.
Yeah. So there's very little that's closed about the tradition, but how it plays out in ritual, it's actually kind of interesting because my second degree initiation is kind of what kicked off the whole non-binary thought process and journey for me. And that ritual involves uniting the masculine and feminine within yourself, or like your two polarities or whatever. And I sort of like to joke that I'm not going to say my second degree ritual made me non-binary, but my second degree ritual made me non-binary. Like, at least made me aware of that in a way I'd never been aware of it before. So
brought out something that was already there, maybe.
Right. So the way it plays out in ritual for us is even though we are a Wiccan tradition, we do not do every single ritual is different. There may be certain set pieces that are included or not, and it depends on what the ritual needs magically. So for example, we do not do the symbolic great rite in every ritual, or even most rituals, really. I've seen it a few times, but it's really like, does that have magical importance to what we're doing? Yes or no. And anyone of any gender can embody any deity within the assembly. That's always been the way.
Right.
So it's really nice to have a lot of options, and now that we have, every coven has traditionally had a high priest and high priestess, which have traditionally aligned with masculine and feminine gender identities, but now we have passed a new aspect of our bylaws that say that two people of any gender combination at all can be leaders of a coven. So that's really freeing and nice, and it also means that if you have more of one gender than another in your coven, that you're not trying to, play favorites and elevate someone to leadership who maybe isn't ready just because they're the correct gender for the spot that's open, which I think is always kind of a problem to do that. So yeah. It's really nice that now people can become leaders and they have opportunities no matter what their gender is and no matter what slots are available in your coven.
That's totally sound and sensible. I mean, that's obviously what I'm pushing towards with the idea of inclusive Wicca as well. And I didn't actually know about the Assembly of the Sacred Wheel when I started writing my stuff. So I think it's great that there's people out there doing this stuff already. It's fantastic. So
yeah, we're fortunate. One of our founders, Ivo Dominguez Jr., has been very like of gender expansive mind for much longer than most of the rest of society, and was very intentional about, you know, these things are not required, like the chalice and the athame are not required aspects of every ritual, because, and didn't want people to stand in a circle alternating boy girl as some people did back in the 70s and probably still do today.
Oh yeah, they do. Yeah, I mean, I got initiated in 1991, and I think it was, as you know, very aware of being bisexual, and I was like, hang on a minute, I can make energy with anybody of any gender. I don't need to be, you know, I don't need to stand boy girl to make that work.
Like, you don't need tab A slot B.
Yeah. Yeah, so some of my work has been on making the athame and chalice ritual more inclusive, and actually the words that we use came from a group in Europe who came up with it well before I did. So
awesome.
So yeah, the standing on the shoulders of giants, as they say. And also my other big thing is the two chalices ritual, which I'm very proud of. So which started life as like, oh, let's do a same-sex version of the Athamian chalice, and then it was like it just became a general queer inclusive thing that anybody can do. Once other queer people got hold of it and started expanding on it, it was like, oh great, this is great. So
that's awesome.
Yeah, like take a ritual, give it to a whole room full of queer people doing a ritual, and they'll go, hey, this is good, right, let's do this as well. Like, yay. So pretty cool. Which is why I think, you know, having these conversations is so important, because, you know, people get to share ideas, and that's why I'm very excited about your blog as well, which I think it's a really important voice. So that's great.
Thank you.
So yeah, so it's really fantastic that your tradition has been so inclusive, and I saw the Black Lives Matter statement they put out as well. It was really good.
Yeah, we definitely have strong advocacy focus, and especially being as close as we are to Washington, D.C., we're keenly aware of a lot of things happening at the governmental level, and ways in which we may need to be involved in the mundane world to fight for justice as part of our spiritual charge. Because I personally don't think that you can call yourself anyone who worships and works with the earth without doing things at a large level to protect that planet. You know, absolutely. Advocating and donating, and, you know, there's a lot of different ways to approach the problem. I actually worked, one of my jobs mid-career was working for an organization that did advocacy about environmental issues and hunger, and both domestically and internationally. And I was the grassroots advocacy director, and part of my job was to teach people calling your members of Congress is not scary, and here's why, and here's how to do it, and here's why you can donate all the money in the world to these causes, and it's not going to have the same impact as if somebody votes in a way that is beneficial can have a much bigger impact. Like 30 seconds of your time versus, you know, $50 in a bucket can make a really, really big difference. So I, you know, especially being close to Washington, D.C. and being close to Congress and everything like that, of course, with a very United States focus here, but I just think it's very important that we all get involved and try to make a difference in the world we're living in, because this is the world in which we do our magic.
Absolutely. I mean, completely on the same page there. I'm involved with my local NDP, which is the New Democratic Party in Canada, and also before I left England, I was involved in trade union work. So tried to put my money where my mouth is, or my activism where my mouth is, because it's all very well being
Absolutely.
like a social justice advocate on Twitter or whatever, but you've got to do something in the real world as well.
Agreed.
So, yeah. So hope to make some kind of a difference. Right, I totally forgot to put my questions up on the side, so I'm just gonna
It's okay.
pull them up. Luckily, I have something I prepared earlier.
I can do a quick dance and distract people. Like, don't
Yeah, do
look
that.
over
Very
there.
cool.
Hey, look at me. I'm doing a
Woohoo.
thing. Wow, what's happening here? Nothing to see. Nothing to see.
That's totally awesome. Oh yes, got it. Right. So as well as your practice with Assembly of the Sacred Wheel, do you practice on your own?
Oh, yes, absolutely. I think that's a foundational aspect to being a witch, especially because people are very busy and trying to have group ritual. It's usually we're able to in times that are not pandemic, we're typically only able to meet in person in my coven every 6 weeks or so for sabbats, and maybe once in between for a class or a new moon ritual or something. But yeah, I think daily practice on your own is really critical to keeping yourself spiritually and psychologically and physically healthy. And also, there's a lot you can do on your own. A lot of the things you need to do are focused on your own stuff. So, like I'm writing this thing and I need to put some energy into it.
Yeah, that's great. I couldn't say I have a daily practice, but I do try to keep up between things. Yes, and okay, this is a hard one. So what would you say your definition of queer magic would be?
Ooh, I have not thought about that specifically. Let's see. I would say queer magic is magic that is inclusive of all of the amazing diversity in the world, not just gender, but also racially, also species, also, there's so much here that we can work with, and limiting ourselves to, very specific separate boxes it inhibits our magic. So being inclusive of all the different ways in which people are expressive, being inclusive and aware of all the different ways in which you can do magic, I think it opens up a lot of different possibilities that maybe weren't considered by people who wrote some of the foundational Wicca books back in the 50s, for example.
Yeah, I mean, I think the whole thing of sort of limiting it down to, okay, you can only make magic with the gender binary. Like, that's such a limited palette to work with. It's one of the reasons I value Doreen Valiente is that she was pushing for queer inclusion back in the day. So
Awesome.
yeah, because I was at her 1997 talk at the Pagan Federation, and she basically said, Gerald was a homophobe. I think he was wrong. End of. So there you go.
Nice.
And she was like, I've met gay witches and they're great, and good for her.
Well, and to that end, that's sort of what propelled me to create Major Arqueerna, is that, and to teach about Kabbalah and to write about Kabbalah specifically, is reading a lot of the works that were written early 20th century by Dion Fortune, Gareth Knight. There's just a lot of random and unneeded homophobia and transphobia and misogyny and ableism and racism in these books. And yes, they're writing within the context of a society that was very supportive of those toxic beliefs, but it's not like there weren't people around who disagreed. They chose go along with that mainstream belief of, oh yes, this is just how women are. And it's part of what really gets me fired up too about the whole what masculine and feminine energy is that I, as someone who was born assigned female at birth, I'm very unhappy with like, oh, well, feminine is passive. Feminine energy is passive. Like, no, like, first of all, if it's passive, is it energy? Like, isn't the definition of energy something that moves? But like, it's dark and it's passive and it's receptive, and it's like, no,
No,
that's not what this package is. There's nothing about this that is just passive and receptive. And honestly, I think that, and I'm getting on a bit of a tangent here, but I think those kind of beliefs really feed into toxic beliefs that are part of rape culture.
yes,
You know, that
absolutely.
women have things done to them and men do the things, and that's the natural order of things. And that just really irritates me about, like, we're going to label this masculine, we're going to label this feminine. It's like, no, labels have consequences. And if you're just reiterating, you know, toxic beliefs from the patriarchy, you're not actually being a radical, cool, new spiritual practice.
Absolutely. I mean, at least Dion Fortune said that women were active on the inner plane, but it's like, it's too much like the angel in the house, and right, you know, we're all demure outside, but when we're inside, we can be like rampant. When we're on the inner planes, we can be rampant active creatures, but otherwise not. It's like, that's no fun.
Yes, they were certainly radical for their time, and they did say some stuff that would have been considered shocking and groundbreaking. But at the same token, it's coupled with things like, you know, well, obviously, you know, Dion Fortune had this whole bit about the races and how, like, you know, it wouldn't be appropriate for a Western-born person to study Eastern philosophy because it's not our genetic makeup, and vice versa, and all these things about who's like naturally more inclined for things based on their heritage. I'm like, nope.
Yeah, no, that is really dodgy, isn't it? And I think it's so important to consider the middle pillar, as you've been doing, and also you know, I've been working on trying to expand people's ideas of what polarity is, because people conflate polarity with gender, and they are not the same thing. And the people who wrote the Kybalion in 1912 knew that. So like you say, there's no excuse, because contemporaries were out there saying stuff that that counteracted all that toxic box.
Right. Well, it goes back even more than 100 years ago. The people who developed the Tree of Life glyph as we know it today, this came out in about the 1600s.
Exactly.
There are aspects to this that are very groundbreaking, like the fact that there is a middle pillar. Like, they called it the masculine and feminine pillar, but then they had the pillar of balance in between. So we had non-binary representation in the Tree of Life for hundreds of years.
Yeah.
And not only that, they were really fast and loose with gender, like how each sphere has a Hebrew name, of course, and Hebrew names have masculine and feminine endings. So they didn't just put masculine names on the masculine tree and the masculine pillar, and feminine names on the feminine pillar. They're really mixed and matched quite a lot. And the whole way in which the tree shows energy flow shows that every sphere is both projective and receptive at the same time. So we have bisexual spheres. We have,
the lightning flash comes down across. Yeah.
Right. Brilliant. Exactly. So it's projective to this sphere, but receptive to this one. And then we have things like how Netzach, for example, too, is, it's the ultimate feminine, and it's the, it's Venus is aligned with it. It's on the masculine pillar. So there's a lot of fast and loose play with the concepts of gender in the tree. And then when you add in the early 20th century, they come up with these telesmic images or magical images to associate with each sphere. That gets even more interesting, because then we get intersex representation. The magical image for Hod is an intersex person.
Wow.
And we don't even really have intersex representation in pop culture of any great significance, but we've had it in the Tree of Life for the last 100+ years. And I think that's really, really cool.
That is amazing. It's really, really excellent. Yeah. And you think about, the yin yang symbol in the fact that there's actually a triple version of the yin yang symbol.
Oh, cool.
So presumably the third thing is sort of gender neutral, and then also the idea that you've got the black dot in the white half and the white dot in the black half. I've always really liked that. And also that it can be a fractal symbol, so it kind of just goes on forever, that like each dot in each half contains another yin yang symbol, which I like that idea.
That's awesome.
Yeah, like there's so much out there, and when you look back to pre-Christian traditions where there was much more acceptance of queerness and queer gods and multi-gendered gods and gods that could shift through different genders, and there's just so much there that's kind of was airbrushed out of history, and now we're kind of recovering it, and yet there's people still stuck in this kind of gender binary thing. And I'm like, yeah, because the thing I find really useful, and it ties in with what you were saying about how the energy moves through the Sephiroth in the Tree of Life, is the idea of force and form.
Mm-hmm.
So you get away from masculine energy and feminine energy and just talk about,
receptivity,
like the force comes in and doesn't have to have a gender particularly, and then it arrives in the form, but it can't, force is somewhat ineffective without a form to contain it, which is why we cast a circle, right? So
it's like steam. Like steam accomplishes nothing if it just disperses through the air, but if you force it through a combustion engine, it can create power.
Right.
And
force and form.
That's force and form. Exactly.
Perfect.
You need both. And the same with our magic. Like we need not only the energy, but we need a container for that energy for it to work. We need the words of our ritual. We need the focus of our intent. All these things constrain that energy to a particular thing, as opposed to I'm just sending my energy everywhere. So if you want to accomplish something, you need both force and form.
Absolutely. And I find it a very useful concept, because if you start talking about yin and yang, there's still part of your brain going, oh yes, right, so yin is the feminine and yang is the masculine, whereas force and form is sufficiently abstracted, although people do associate them with masculine and feminine, it's sufficiently abstracted that it gets me away from thinking about it like that, and I find that really helpful.
The other fun fact about Kabbalah with force and form is when we look at Hakma and Bina, which are the top two right before Keter here, the ultimate force and form on the tree, they're typically seen as like, well, Hakma is the super like phallus of like the ultimate masculine energy just spewing everywhere, and Bina is like ultimate receptive, dark, feminine energy. But their names are both feminine in Hebrew. And if you look into the Bible, into Proverbs, they're anthropomorphized as two feminine co-creators alongside God for creating the world. So I like to think of them as the lesbian power couple of the tree, where typically, they're just like, well, Hakma is very masculine, very, all blah. But it's like, but Hakma is a feminine word that means wisdom in Hebrew.
Right.
And
there's
wisdom
a whole book in the Apocrypha devoted to wisdom, right? Which is personified as feminine.
Right. And philosophy, philosophia, is the love of wisdom. And it's also feminine there. So I think there's all these things that what sort of got me to writing about this is, why is nobody talking about this? It seems to be staring me in the face how incredibly queer, empowering a symbol the Kabbalah is, and yet I'm not seeing that in any of even the contemporary books I'm reading on it are just kind of glossing over that fact and focusing on, well, this is a very masculine sphere and this is and it's like, no, they're not. Everything is kind of a lot of different things.
Hochma's obviously the butch one.
Right.
That's fantastic. Love it. So cool. So tell us a bit about your blog as well, because I was just looking at your recap of posts for 2020, which is really impressive, and
thank you.
Tweeted it out as I said I would. So you've been doing lots of work on paganism and book reviews and Kabbalah, and also the non-binary piece you did the other day, which was great.
Thank you. Major Our Queerna was born because I was teaching and speaking, and every time I went to do a teaching event, people would say, well, what's your website? And I'd be like, I don't have one, which is hilarious because I work in web and work on websites all day, but I didn't have one devoted to my teaching work at all. So at the end of last year, I was kind of like, fine, I will create sort of a signpost site. And I had been bugging a friend of mine who's a burlesquer named Baron Atomy, who is really good with clever names, and said, hey, I'm trying to express this concept and I want sort of a cool name. And they were like, oh, what about Major Our Queerna? And I'm like, Done. Love it. Yes. So that became the name of the website. And it was originally just going to be kind of a signpost of, hi, this is me. I teach stuff. And then I could put all my class materials on it for people to access. And then the more I started thinking about it, the more I was like, maybe I should make it into a blog. And I think about a month later, I'm like, yeah, all right, let me post a blog. And I started with a review of Misha Magdalen's Outside the Charmed Circle, which had just come out. And I was just like, all right, I have a lot of things to say, as it turns out, and I guess I'm going to keep this up. And I've kept it up as a pretty much weekly practice, with rare exception. I think I missed 1 or 2 weeks in there due to just a lot going on. But it's been kind of a cool thing this year to have that, and to be able to put down and crystallize some of my thoughts, and to see the feedback from other people for whom it resonates, especially the queer Kabbalah stuff, which is largely the focus of the blog. But I also talk a little bit about tarot, which is one of my other passions, and definitely want to boost the signal of people, queer magic authors who are doing great stuff. So book reviews is big, and yes, I have your books there in the stack for future review. Yes, but I want to take the time to be like, hey, there's some great stuff out there to share, and I want to make sure people know about all the amazing things that are out there.
Yeah, that's great, and I've really enjoyed the book reviews, and yeah, I need to do one for Outside the Charm Circle as well. Really enjoyed it. It's great.
Such a good book. I love it so much.
Yeah, it's really great. So hard to pick one, but what would you say your favorite queer magic book is?
Ooh, honestly, it's probably Outside the Charm Circle of what I've read so far, and excluding your books because I haven't read them yet. But yeah, Outside the Charm Circle is really great. I think it's a fantastic, well-informed summary of like how to approach magic from a queer perspective, and it has some good academic groundings and a very sort of pan-traditional focus, because Misha has been involved in a lot of different pagan traditions over their life, and so I think having that broad perspective is really useful, and it also gets really spicy and angry about things that it should be spicy and angry about, and goes on a fantastic tear about consent, and
Yes.
I really appreciate that section in particular.
Yeah, me too. I mean, so important, and a really good summary of consent as well. And because I don't know how many people have actually kind of bought and read and digested Pagan Consent Culture, that I co-edited with Christine Hoff-Kramer, because it's quite a big book. But you can kind of dip into it because it's an anthology. But I think that chapter in Outside the Charm Circle was pretty useful. It was very good and concise.
Yeah. I think a close second favorite would be the Queer Magic anthology put together by Lee Harrington and Ty Phoenix.
Yes.
It's really, which your essay was in, which is how I got connected with you, because that was one of my very favorite things in that entire anthology.
Oh, cool. Thank you.
I just started screaming yes at the book when I was reading that, and yeah, it's got some fantastic stuff in it, and I would commend that to anyone who's looking to explore, because that has an incredibly broad reach and breadth of things. So people, regardless of what their magical perspective is, should be able to find something very relevant to their situation in there.
Yes, and it signposts you on to more people's work, which is great. And I love that anthology, and one of my favorite things in it is the queer wheel of the year that's in there. That is really, really good. I just did a queer magic video to kick off the series of interviews, and I mentioned that in there as well. So yeah, it's really good. Yeah, I think it's interesting because for me, like, Misha's book acts as a really good kind of, right, okay, this is how they explain all the all the terminology really, really well, and I kind of didn't bother to do that in my book. I just went, right, okay, let's assume that we all know what all these words mean, and just go for it. I think I sort of explain things a bit as I go along, but what they've done so well is go, right, okay, this is all the stuff and how it works for you people who aren't quite on board yet, and then go on to explore. So that's useful for people who are just exploring their own identities as well, I think.
Absolutely. Yeah, I have at least one friend who read the Queer Magic anthology and said, "Oh, I just realized I'm queer." And I was like, "Awesome!" Like, that's really great. I like that.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
such a good anthology, and there's a lot of stuff. There's a lot of stuff out there now. Because when I interviewed Misha, they were saying that a lot of people say, "Oh, wow, yours is the first book on this subject," and it's like, they said, "No, it's a part of an ongoing conversation, and the more the merrier. We need more of this sort of thing." So
it's really stunning sometimes what isn't out there, and I ran into this, and it's what sparked the post of mine that'll probably have the furthest reach, which is your adult child just came out as non-binary, now what, which came out last week, and so far it's been picked up and actually wholesale copy pasted onto another blog, which I was like, hey, could you include some attribution here? That'd be really nice.
Yeah, like use the reblog function on WordPress, because that just does an excerpt and then links back to you.
Yeah, things like that. It's fine. I really want to get the information out there, so I wasn't too upset by it. But and they were kind and put like attribution at the top, which I requested. But
you'd have done it to start with.
I was really just stunned, though, that I was looking for information for parents of adult non-binary children, and there really wasn't much. And almost all of it is parents of trans people and non-binary, like in really small type kind of thing. Like, and especially for people who are non-binary, the trans label can be sort of fraught. Like, some people really identify as trans and non-binary, and some people who are non-binary do not want the label trans at all for various reasons. Either they feel that their experience is not close enough to people who identify as trans, and they want to be respectful of not invading that space, or whatever. Like, people have different opinions, and they're all correct in their own way. Whatever is right for you, labels, no one should disagree with.
Absolutely.
Use your labels as you like. But it's like, for parents who are trying to get their heads around non-binary, putting it immediately into the trans bucket can be like add an extra layer of fear for them. Because that seems like a bigger thing, even though it's all kind of the same thing. And those of us who've studied gender and sexuality know that this is all kind of in the same realm of stuff. But parents think, oh, but my kid came out as non-binary, not transgender. Why is there nothing out there unless I search for transgender? And then they're like, sort of asterisk to the transgender and gender non-conforming and gender non-binary and all of this.
I mean, I sort of feel like I don't feel trans enough, if you know what I mean. So I definitely feel that.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of those feels, and it's something that I personally wrestle with and haven't really figured out like what my level of comfort is yet with the trans label. And some days I feel like totally part of that, and some days I'm like, maybe not. I don't know.
Well, also because I'm kind of cis passing, I feel like it would almost be appropriating trans identity to use that label. So
yeah, and there's a lot of conversations around it, and different people within the trans community feel different ways about that. And it's all valid, and it's part of an ongoing conversation. But I was sort of stunned, and I'm like, if a person with a lot of savvy around the terminology and around the issues at hand, who's very good at Google, cannot find stuff, I can't expect a parent who's brand new to this information to be able to find anything and to find support. And so after kind of going down this rabbit hole, I was like, all right, I'm going to aggregate what I found into a post with the headline I was looking for, which is, this happened. Not like, I wanted to make sure this was very easy to Google for people who are looking for that information.
Yeah, I thought it was super helpful. And like, you tagged me in on Twitter, and I'm like,
Yeah, I posted it in a few groups on Facebook for non-binary folks, and I've already had people say, oh my gosh, I needed this so much. I've already shared it with my parents. This is really helping me talk to them. And I was like, yay, like, this post is only a week old. It's already changing lives, and it makes me so happy.
That's fantastic. Yeah, very well done for that. It's really, really good.
Thanks.
Yeah, I mean, it's so, I've had people say about my books, like, oh, there was this LGBT person and they thought Wicca wasn't for them because of the gender binary stuff, and I showed them your book and they were, or encouraged them to buy the book, whatever else, and they've gone, oh, okay. That was All Acts of Love and Pleasure, which I hadn't developed the ideas to the extent that I have in the other two books. So it really is exciting to kind of go, oh, you know, people are actually benefiting from this. So yeah. and this is why we need more queer voices to, you know, because it does change people's lives, and it does free up the minds of the cis-het hegemonic group. So because there's lots of open-minded cis-het people out there that just don't necessarily know what to do. Yeah.
And having more voices come from more places with more diverse life experiences, I think, can only benefit. And it's part of what I write about with queer Kabbalah too, is that a lot of people look at Kabbalah and think that's hard. I don't want to study that because that's really hard. And it is and it isn't. Like, the basic concepts are not that difficult, but too often when people write about it, they have to include all of the complexity. They're like, well, I can't really explain this unless I explain the virtues and the vices and the archangels, and like, it's this huge correspondence chart for every sphere, and it's a huge amount of information to ingest, much less try to get your head around. So I wanted to write about a way in which it's approachable, and it's also my intent to write about queer issues in a way that are approachable for people who haven't studied these things for years, because your audience usually includes people who are brand new to a subject. And if you write in a way that only preaches to the choir and uses terminology and language that only the insiders will understand, you're not actually reaching as many people as you could.
Yeah, that's very true. I think that's important. Yeah, I mean, my approach is to have a glossary on my website that gets updated every so often. So
it's a good
the
glossary.
Terminology can change.
I have referenced it. Thank you.
You're welcome. It was a group effort on the part of the Inclusive Wicca group on Facebook. So
awesome.
Yeah, so that was helpful. Yeah, I mean, it's so exciting that this whole area is now opening up and more people are writing, and also that publishers are picking up on it and running with it. You know, I think it's super important. So
yeah, I like that it's a hot issue right now for publishers, because I would like to ingest as many books on queer magic as possible. I think it's something I'm personally super interested in, and anytime I see a book on it, I'm like, yoink, yep, that's going on the reading stack.
Yeah.
And even just the ways in which people are approaching their subjects with more sensitivity, even books that aren't specifically about queer magic can be written in a very queer sensitive and inclusive way. Like Courtney Weber's book Tarot for One is a very inclusive approach to tarot, and has a whole thing about gender in the cards, and that, you know, it's not a binary gender thing, and it's all about what the cards mean to you personally. And what I actually kind of like about, another tangent, what I like about the Rider-Waite-Smith deck is that a lot of the characters in there are kind of androgynous. When you look at them, they may have been intended to be, you know, specifically masculine or feminine, but they come off as like, nah, this really could be a non-binary person. It could be a masculine person, could be a feminine person. I don't know. It's kind of cool that they're in there, and I can see myself in a lot more cards than just, you know, the queens.
Turns out Pamela Coleman Smith lived with another woman for I think 20 years.
Yeah. So yeah, I love that.
Yeah, very cool person.
Pixie was awesome.
Oh, totally. Yes. And also very excited to see the Melanated Tarot, which is like an update to, because I mean the original drawings I think weren't necessarily, she may not have done the colors of the original drawings. She may have drawn them as black and white. So
yeah,
the fact that somebody else colored them in kind of pink, it's totally legitimate to take those same drawings and kind of tweak them a bit to make them brown. So
Yeah,
yay.
I really like seeing updates to the Rider-Waite-Smith deck. I love the Modern Witch Tarot. I think is one of my favorites, by Lisa Sturl, that came out last year, I think. It's one of the ones I keep close. It's actually like in arm's reach right now over there. Like I have a little
Cool.
basket in my workspace with some runes and a tarot deck and like the remote for my treadmill and like just a couple of like glasses cleaner cloth and a stress ball, and they're all just kind of over there to the side.
Oh, yes.
I don't have like a
enough,
formal
very similar to
desk.
mine. This is my stress ball.
Ah!
He's too cute to squeeze.
Yeah, I'll pull mine out, although it's buried under a couple of things here. Oh, and I also keep a D20 because nerd. So actually, no, it's a D10. That's right. So this is my stress ball. I have a Gretzko from the Netflix show. So I really like that one. Yeah, I actually have a D10 because I have 10 different strength training routines, and I roll a dice to determine which one I'm going to do.
Oh, wow. That's very cool.
So,
yeah, I did have
sometimes you have to leave it to fate.
Yes, I did have some weights around here somewhere, but I think they've gone downstairs. So yeah,
I haven't been good about sticking to said routines, but I do have them, and I asked a trainer to come up with like little 5-minute routines because I'm more likely to do something short.
Oh,
and if I can do a short thing during 3 breaks during work, then I still get, an okay strength workout. But anyway,
brilliant.
That's a tangent.
Yeah, I like tangents. Yeah, I did Movember, and I managed to cycle 100 kilometers on my exercise bike. And
that's awesome.
I was really chuffed that Movember have a category you can select non-binary.
Yay!
And they, because you're either a Mo, I think it's something like a Mo brother or a Mo sister, but you can be a Mo, just a Mo. And I thought,
nice.
Could have had sibling. But anyway, they had a category for non-binary, so I was like, yay, thank you.
That's awesome.
Yes, I was very pleased. So checked that box.
It is always a relief to find a form that has non-binary as an option, as opposed to other or prefer not to say,
yes.
or just not giving you any third option and just limiting you to male or female. I also really appreciate when like you have more expansive options for titles, like not just Mr., Ms., Doctor, that there's also like mix in there, or the option to pick no title. It's weird. The little things that bring you relief on a daily basis as a non-binary person are sort of varied and interesting.
Yes. Well, it's just so nice when somebody goes, oh yes, non-binary people exist, I will include them. Yeah, and I actually did an Instagram post about like how to include non-binary people in your invitations, and I put that on my blog as well, because it kind of annoys me when people say like
women and non-binary,
yes,
like it's woman light.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. That's exactly the thing. And it's just like, just say all genders welcome. Or if you
I
want
did a post on that as well.
Yeah, good. I will find it and tweet it. Yeah, actually I should do like I do every so often when there's more queer books out, I do a big queer pagan reading list, and I should do one for blog posts as well. That would be good.
Yeah, definitely.
I think your blog will feature quite heavily in that list.
Yay, thank you. Yeah, it's really nice to see when groups are one of the better ways I've seen phrased, because sometimes people do want AFAB-ish spaces, or they're working with like menstruation or something like that, but there are ways to make that invitation more inclusive than just saying for women, and that assumes a lot of things, like not all women menstruate, not all women have uteruses,
not everyone who menstruates is a woman.
Exactly. So yeah, there's a whole lot to that.
Yeah,
so
and also I think we should break down that barrier and talk about menstruation in front of male and masculine identified people as well. So
absolutely. If it's something that afflicts half of the planet, then we should probably be more open to discussing it.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things I really want to create, and I'm still trying to figure out how to do it, is to create a space where non-binary people can talk about the menopause, because there's all this flipping red tent stuff, which is even when people do it, like the people who organize it seem kind of turfy, and even the people who do it with the best of intentions tend to make it like, I just can't go to one of those things. It's so uncomfortable, and as a result, I've missed out on all kinds of stuff that I might have otherwise known about the menopause. And I really want to be able to sit down with other non-binary people and just go, right, can we talk about how these biological changes work without making horrible gender essentialist assumptions about them? And I think that that is just so needful.
Yeah.
But it's just getting enough non-binary people in one place to actually do it.
Yeah, well, and also the fact that people born with, you know, penises and more testosterone also have hormonal changes at midlife, and we don't really talk about them because I think there's less of an obvious physical sign of it. But those are kind of, you know, as with the patriarchy, you know, hurting everybody, it also hurts people in those situations because they don't have any information, because we haven't really studied it, because, oh, that's just a woman thing. But yeah, there's a lot of stuff we could discuss about midlife that unfortunately has been seen as taboo for so long. Like even just finding information about perimenopause is really hard. Like I'm in that stage now where it's like, is this a thing that happens? Should I see my doctor? Is this a normal thing? Like, you know, I don't even know, because I don't know what to expect.
Well, my perimenopause, I started experiencing that, and I'm like, okay, that's weird. Is it a perimenopause symptom? Why have I suddenly got zits again? Like, you know, and which was definitely, and also one of my teenage allergies came back that I hadn't seen for 30 years, you know. So yeah, it's a huge thing.
Yeah,
and we really need to be able to sit around and talk about these things as queer people, and without all of the, you know, oh yes, it's your womb talking to you or whatever, you know. Just like, go away.
I don't have one, so it has nothing to say, because it's in a medical disposal facility somewhere.
Right, okay. Yeah, there you go then.
So if Madge has something to say, she's calling collect from somewhere.
Yeah, I mean, I've never had a child, so like all that stuff about, oh yes, you know, women have children, blah blah blah, and I'm like, I didn't.
Yeah, well, and oh gosh, we could talk for days about the whole triplicate goddess thing and the maiden mother crone. And have you read Jailbreaking the Goddess? Because I really liked that one.
Oh, that sounds good. No, I must read that.
Oh, yeah, it's Lazara Fox Allen, I think is the name of the author, and it basically says, let's throw that out and give a new fivefold goddess that is not based on fertility. And there's more archetypes you can work with that are sort of tied to stages of life, but could happen at any time. So I really like that.
Yeah, I mean, I've done some work on that, and we had a really good discussion on it in the Inclusive Wicca Facebook group, and somebody said that she didn't feel crone-like immediately after menopause. She felt like, okay, once she got to about 70, then she felt that way, but not before. And I'm like, yeah, that seems logical. And also, you know, I need a non-binary crone figure.
Right. Yeah. The book's incredible. I recommend reading it, because it works in more stuff about creativity as a concept, as opposed to, you know, giving birth as like the only expression of creativity, and also has acknowledges that you can feel like any of these or identify with any of them at any point in life. They're not life stages, they are life attitudes, maybe, or like you know, different influences, archetypal influences, I think is the better way to put it. So yeah, it was a great read.
It sounds really good. I mean, I've never been into the triple goddess particularly, and because I remember, you know, thinking about the 4 phases of the moon and going, well, there's 4 phases of the moon, and you know, that not 3, and what about the 4th phase? And then coming across the idea of the fivefold goddess and going, oh yeah, this is great. Because it's actually mentioned in Robert Graves's The White Goddess. he actually talks about a fivefold goddess.
Nice.
Yeah. I mean, obviously there are multiple flaws in the White Goddess in that he doesn't actually mention female poets until page 494.
Whoops.
Yes, and also that all of the roles, for most of the book, the roles that he describes are in relation to men. So it's like, because it's midwife, mother, and layer out, and it's like, and also the whole thing about the muse, and it's like, well, you know, we do have an existence in our own right, and we have our own creativity. So yeah. But
interesting.
The fivefold concept is really useful.
Definitely. Yeah, I like any kind of new conception or breakdown of that, because, and also sort of youth father sage is a little bit anemic, I think.
Yeah.
Like youth. Okay, you're a youth. You know, like, all right, you're, you know, what does that mean?
Yeah.
Like there's
probably
so
because
much
they didn't want to
deeper we
use
could
the word
go.
warrior, I would imagine.
Probably, which is good, but
yeah,
or hunter or something like that.
Yeah, like you can have female hunters and non-binary hunters. So
right.
yeah. I think, I mean, I just don't work with the concept of the triple goddess in ritual at all. And I don't work with the gender binary. Surprise, surprise! I don't work with the gender binary cycle of the
like the
Wheel of
mid
Year
cycle.
thing.
Yeah,
the thing about the, you know, the god and the goddess get together and then she strikes him down with a sickle and all this stuff. It's like, well, for one thing, let's not conflate the hunter god, the forest god, with the agricultural god, because they're like chalk and cheese. And then also, just, well, I don't like, because I'm a polytheist, I don't like conflating gods. And also it's the starting point for all of it was, well, this is hopelessly gender binary. Gone. So I've never really worked with the triple goddess as a concept.
Not to mention the weirdness in the Wheel of the Year cycle of like the goddess has sex with the god, gives birth, the god dies, and then she hooks up with her child, and then he becomes like, I'm just like, that's kind of icky. I don't.
And also the whole kind of
with me.
Chase and pursuit thing can be. Some people write about that in a really rapey way, and it's horrible.
Agreed.
Yeah, so like the whole thing just needs to go. Which is one of the reasons I really liked the queer cycle of the year in the Queer Magic book. And also, like my inclusive wheel of the year is, right, okay, there isn't a, you know, it's a wheel in the sense that there are 8 festivals and it goes around the year, but they're not necessarily linked to each other thematically. They're just like, okay, this is what we do at Midsummer. Some years we do this and some years we do that, and it gets tweaked. And but there are some things that have become old favorites, like, okay, we're going to go do queer Robin Hood at Beltane, because there's loads of queerness in the Robin Hood story.
Yes.
And then we're going to do the Grail Mysteries, also queered, obviously, at Midsummer, and so on around the year, and include queer ancestors at Samhain. And
that's awesome.
Yeah, it's all just kind of evolved over the years. So
I love that. Yeah, I think there's so much more potential. Like our coven did a Eat the Wheel of the Year one year where our rituals were built around what food would have been available in northern UK at this time of year, you know, 1,000, 2,000 years ago, and having like just the small amounts of food and seeing, you know, how the food supply dwindled over the course of the year, and then was, you know, very robust in the middle of the year and around the harvest, but then like we have to be careful and we have to save things, and this is a treat to have these few nuts right now. And it was really cool. We liked it a lot because we're a Celtic coven, and it was really neat to sort of connect to that aspect of it in that region.
That's fantastic. I love it. Yeah, because 2,000 years ago, no potatoes either. So you just got like,
nope.
You'd be lucky if you have turnips. So yeah, that's fantastic. I love it.
Yeah, our high priestess was an archaeologist, so she also has a pretty good sense of like historical, what would have been correct, and did a lot of research on, you know, like, oh, well, you might have run into a trader who had salt, so now we actually have salt on the fish and it tastes better, kind of thing.
Yeah, and there would have been some herbs, but not the range, not the Mediterranean herbs we have now, but there would have been, I don't know, sorrel and salsify and things like that. So, and if you were near the coast, you could have gone and got some sea samphire to put on, and also Jack by the Hedge, which is a fairly common plant in the UK. It's an invasive species in Ontario, unfortunately.
Oh.
I was like, oh, I'm really happy to see this plant. And then somebody told me it was an invasive species and I should rip it all out. And I'm like, heartbroken, I'm going to rip out all my Jack by the Hedge. So, yes. Yeah. When you think of all the plants that got brought here by settlers, some of which didn't do too well and are not helping the local ecosystem.
Yeah, we had a whole infestation in my college years of Asian beetles, which were brought in to control the aphid population, and then surprise, they overpopulated and took over everything. And
no. Yeah.
In my dormitory, you'd look up, and in the corner where like two walls met the ceiling, there'd be thousands of them clustered in like a mass. And they also bit, and they stunk really bad. When like they look like ladybugs, but they bite and they stink. And so we had them everywhere, and just, yeah, it's like how the story ends the same way every time. When you bring in an outside species to control a population of something, then that species gets overpopulated and you have a new problem. I don't know why we keep doing this.
Yeah, that is not good, is it? No. So,
no.
Like, we should understand. I mean, that's the thing. It's like Western science still has this attitude that we know best, and it's like, you know, it's one of the reasons I respect the Indigenous way of doing things so much, is because they work very carefully with nature, and you know, and that's what we should aspire to as pagans too, and without appropriating their stuff, obviously. Yeah, so yeah, really important. And you know, I always get excited to see something that's like, oh, that's like a plant from home. But then, or if it is a plant from home, then we've got problems. So,
exactly.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Well, it's been a wonderful interview, very enjoyable, and look forward to reading more of your stuff. And thank you so much. It's been great.
Thank you so much, Ivana. It's been great to finally meet you after
fantastic.
Corresponding online for so long. And I look forward to more chats, and I look forward to more stuff of your blog, and also to finally getting time to read your books. I'm hoping to get to that early next year. So
yay. Awesome.
Yay.
Thanks so much.
Yeah.